So with that, I'd like to introduce Jim Metzner, class of 1975 and pioneer in sound.
Thank you all for coming. Rob, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm blushing. I also want to thank the University of Massachusetts for its BDIC program, which I was part of, which enabled me to sort of do what I wanted to do. And what a great program. So thank you, UMass. Thank you, BDIC. So a little more gratitude and acknowledgement, but a story first. About 15 or so years ago, I was looking through my library, and to my utter dismay, I saw that there were 2 books in my library from the University of Massachusetts Library, overdue about 30 years. And so I was aghast. I said, great guilt. And so I sent it a letter and these 2 books back in, thinking, what will happen? And I got a lovely letter. It wasn't, they didn't come with a warrant for my arrest or a bill for $1 million. Back whatever the fine. Thank you. That's the word I was searching for. Fine. Any case, but Carol Kinnear, is Carol in the house? She's coming. Anyway, thank you, Carol, for the relationship that we've established. And really, if it hadn't been for these overdue library books, I probably wouldn't be here tonight. So at the time those books were taken out, there I was, and by the way, if any of you are interested, Eric von Hornbossel's On Sensation of Tone is now available after 30 years of absence. The course that I was taking, the ethnomusicology at the BDIC, was being taught by Al Hudson, and Al became my faculty advisor, and I have the real pleasure that Al and Judy Hudson have been supporters of my work are here. So thank you so much for being here and being my friends over all these years. So, thank you, Rob, for your continued support and interest in my work, and Kim, Phil, for making all the logistics happen. And you're incredible to put together everything so beautifully. So, I think I've got all of that business taken care of. Without any further ado, let me say that celebrating its 30th year of broadcasting and now podcasting, I'm Jim Metzner, and this is The Pulse of the Planet. And the title still holds true. The planet really is pulsing, it's vibrating, everything is in motion. You get the sense that the world is speaking to us if we only knew how to listen to it. And there are reminders of this fact from history, one of them being the emperor of Japan, way back in feudal times, and his court, all fabulously dressed in kimonos, would take expeditions in the fall to Arashiyama, near Kyoto, and they would go to listen. Now, what were they listening for? I'll give you a clue. There was a poet who wrote a poem about what they were listening for, a line of poetry. It said something like, "If a jewel of dew could sing, it would tinkle with such a voice." Anybody want to guess as to what they were listening for? Hazard a guess? Here it is. Homeogryllus japonica, also known in Japanese as Suzumushi. It is a cricket. And the Japanese would go to listen to them, and they would collect them and judge them as, have contests for the best sounding cricket, and they would keep them as pets and then release them. But it got me thinking, and by the way, are we getting good balance? You're hearing everybody hearing both speakers? What are there any examples from our culture, do you think, where we go out intentionally to listen to something? And think about that. I mean, I don't know if anybody has a thought right off the bat, but we could come back to that at the end. I'd like to hear if you had the examples. I couldn't think of that many examples of instances where we go to a place intentionally, culturally, especially as a group, to listen. Few and far between, but maybe they'll come back to that at the end if anybody has an example. But of course, most of the time, we are surrounded by sound, and we're not listening. We're not paying attention. It doesn't mean that the sounds aren't there. If we famously don't have earlids, but we're kind of tuning them out. But if sounds are, in fact, always speaking to us all the time, and we're not paying attention to them, what if we paid a little bit more attention to it? What kind of information could we glean from them? So with that as an overriding question, we'll try a little experiment now. I'm going to play 2 sounds for you. Have a listen, and the question is, that I'm going to ask you after the first one, what are these sounds telling us? It could be like where, when, what's going on, stuff like that. Let's hear the first one. Come on in, have a seat. So, what do you think? Where are we? Anything at all? Come sit towards the center. It's better seat, better sound, please. Dawn, good.
Farmyard.
Farmyard. Yep. Yeah. What else?
Possibly in Britain, is it a blackbird?
Possibly in Britain, it's a blackbird. Good guess, but no. Any other, what else? It was subtle, but there were some other sounds over here. Yeah.
It sounded like there is definitely a population of people there, but
Yes.
it was also very much rural.
Rural. And the last thing you said was?
Nature-filled.
Nature-filled. Rural. Okay. Yeah.
I heard like a stream or like
Stream.
rushing water.
Something. I don't think it was a stream, but there was something white noisy. Yeah.
I was going to suggest maybe it was somewhere warmer than Britain because there was so much birdsong.
Good guess. That's an
And
intuitive.
also,
So warmer was the suggestion.
where you get like the rooster crowing a lot is some countries that are more tropical, which have lots of birds
Yes.
wandering about.
Yes. Good guess. Quite right. Yeah.
I could hear roosters, like a primary rooster in the foreground and secondary roosters.
Yeah.
After, and didn't seem like it was an echo. It seemed more
Yeah.
like they were kind of
Something else is going on. Yes. So rural, all very good guesses. And what are we not hearing? Traffic, airplanes, stuff like that, electronic devices. Okay, so it's like that. We are, in fact, being, and you nailed it, it was south of the equator, happened to be Brazil. So let's listen to another one, different instance. Large inside space. Why inside? I'm sorry, loud? Echoing. Very good. That is the key thing. Anyone want to add to that? Like what was happening inside this large? Yeah.
I think people were formally dressed. It sounded like there was a lot of like clacking of shoes.
Clacking. But what? Yes, but what?
I thought it was a drumstick, or, I mean, it wasn't drumming, but it was a,
Stick games.
yeah.
Stick games? Think. Yeah. What? Say that again.
Sounds like baseball.
Baseball, and what did you say after that?
Preschool.
Preschool. And you said children.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's an athletic center?
Bingo. Why children?
Some children coughing.
Yes, but is there anything about the rhythm of? Yeah, you're shaking your head. I mean,
Well, it just felt like, I don't know, there were a lot of childish voices in there. Some were, I don't know, some mild shouting, and just not as a little chaotic, like muted, not muted. I don't know, soft or just in the background.
what about the rhythm of that primary sound, that loud sound? Yeah.
It was more of like a quicker pace than like a longer stride of an adult. It was more like 1, 2, 3, 4 versus 1, 2. So a short stride versus a long stride.
Yeah, did you see she's got the microphone on her? So yes, it's actually the rhythm of a child wearing, to make that sound, what? Wooden shoes, clogs. A child wearing clogs, and it's the rhythm of a kid. That's the rhythm of a kid. It had to be a young girl, and there's some other stuff going on there too. It is an inside kind of a space, but it's not. What's an inside space that's inside yet not inside? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Because it's not entirely inside. It is a courtyard. Who said that? Brilliant. It's a courtyard. So you get the benefits of that echoey space, and yet you're still in the open air. So it's a little bit of both. Very few people guess that, but I have had people listen to it and guess that for whatever reason we have these intuitive, it's actually, there's an intelligence of what sounds are that we're not necessarily always tuned into, but we have it. They are informing us all the time. These are nondescript sounds, but there are other sounds that come out and really demand to be recorded. And that's what sound recordists do. We record sounds in the same way that documentary filmmakers, one of whom just walked into the room, and documentary photographers, just like they take impressions of the visual landscape. Well, documentary sound recordists really take impressions of the world of sound. Now, speaking of photographers, round about just before I came to UMass, in about 1972, I was an assistant to Minor White. Anybody know who Minor White was? Photographer, a really famous photographer. He co-developed the zone system of photography with, anybody know? Ansel Adams. And he was good friends with Ansel. In fact, I got to meet Ansel Adams through Minor. And I was Minor's assistant for a summer in '72. And we would live and breathe and photograph, live and breathe photography. And I dreamt about photographs, literally. And Minor, one day in the morning, very early morning, Minor had a very deep set of pipes. And he said to me, Jim, there's something out there that wants me to take its picture. I don't know what it is, but it's going to find me. And I was so struck by that. And over the years, that has come back to me. And there have been moments that I was the guy, you know, you can imagine Ansel Adams when that famous moonrise over Sirocco, he was the only human being on the planet who could have taken that picture. Well, I'm no Ansel Adams, but I felt like I was the guy with the recorder at a certain moment. But for me, or but for a recordist being there, that sound would have never been documented. The famous tree would have fell in the forest and there was nobody there to hear it. So this next thing you're going to hear is one of those moments. It was Brazil again, and I was in Bahia, northeast coast of Brazil. The place, I think it's the heart of Brazil. Personally, I love Brazil. And I was there at Cachoeira, recording the ceremony, a Catholic ceremony of Nossa Senhora de Boa Morte, Our Lady of Good Death. You lead a good life, you get a good death. And the ceremony, this is the first thing, literally, that I recorded when I got to Brazil. I went there because I knew that this festival was going on. I turned on my recorder as the ceremony itself was ending. So what you're going to hear, unedited, by the way, this is, nobody messed with these sounds. You guys at the station, I think, asked me, do I ever mess with it? This sound is unmessed with. No post-production. What you hear is exactly how it happened. But the beginning, just to set up, you'll hear the organist working with the choir master, and they're going over a couple of things, and then you're following the congregation out into the street. That's all I'll say. I remember thinking, well, if this is what the first 10 minutes are like, what's the next 10 weeks going to be like? I mean, I'd never recorded anything like that. And I think few people have. It was you get a moment like that, and it's a real gift. You feel like you've been given a gift. And to record a sound, and really any good sound recording, you need to you find yourself quite still, maybe a little bit more still than you are in life. Now, part of that is technical, because if you're making a lot of noise when you're making a recording, you're going to kind of screw up the recording. You want to be still. But it's not just technical. It's listening. Don't you find that when you really listen attentively to something, you really want to pay attention and listen, you almost need to be quiet and still to reach that quality of attention. It's like you're being reminded that the world that you're listening to is alive, and you're also alive too. It's a reminder that we're like in this feedback loop of life, listening to life. And, well, if you think about it, right now, the sound of my voice, as dulcet or not as my tones may be, it's reaching you. It's reaching you through your skin, touching your bones. You may not feel your bones vibrating, but very slightly they are. We are in resonance, you and I. We are all in this room, I would hope. I don't see anybody on the ground. We're all breathing. Now, we may not be breathing in unison, but we're sharing a rhythm of breath. And then more subtly, we are creating amongst us an atmosphere of listening. And if you doubt that, if there was one person in this room, or if it was just me, it would be a very different quality of listening than we are established now. Any actor knows that. Any performer knows that. You know and anybody in a conversation, you know when if you're in a conversation, if somebody's listening to you or not. You know when they're not listening. You know all the cues. We're establishing an atmosphere of listening between us. And we're not alone. Out there, I know there are a lot of card-carrying biologists in this class and in this room. And I think that they would agree that, and I certainly have talked to a lot of bioacousticians over the years, and they would say, they gave, certainly in my interviews with them, I got the sense that the whole world is kind of in a network. There's a network of communication and listening and response that we are not necessarily all privy to, or we're privy to just a small portion of the frequency range. So, for example, famously, what I'm getting at is like, everybody knows about bats, which we don't hear. Mostly they're in the ultrasonic range, or would be another example of ultrasonic communication. Maybe dolphins, maybe just something that's above the. Pardon? Whales might be certainly some marine mammals. Some might be below the range of hearing if it's like a big whale, like a blue whale. Elephants are below. They're infrasonic. They're below the range. You wouldn't necessarily hear them, but you'd feel them. And there's evidence that, I once did a show on yeast cells that are singing, apparently, not the national anthem, but they're making a sound. And so here we are in this, hearing just a small portion of this other world of sound. And here's an example from the world of insects, the realm of insects. These are called, what you're about to hear are leaf hoppers. They're pests. But in the world of sound, they make a remarkable sound, as you're about to hear. This was recorded using a transducer. What's a transducer? Basically, it transforms physical motion, vibration into sound, something that we could hear. A phonograph needle is an example of a transducer, translating the grooves of a record into something you can hear. This was a Japanese scientist who very cleverly put a phonograph needle, literally, on the substrate of a plant, listened to these leaf hoppers, And this sound is not manipulated, except it's highly amplified through that method. These are the sounds of leafhoppers, and you'll hear it's like a little duet. They're calling, the male is calling to the female to come to it, and you'll hear the cues of when the female responds. It's a mating call, basically. That's a male. Ooh, that's the female. This is so romantic. Now, the insects, of course, there are insects that we do hear, and maybe most typically would be like what we could call an evening chorus, like the Japanese, but we have our own crickets, and there are all choruses of insects all over the world, often at night. So here is a chorus of insects and amphibians recorded in the Pantanal, a region in Brazil again. Largest wetlands in the world, I believe. The biologists can correct me on that, but I'm pretty sure of it. Now, to record this, I had to wear like a full body suit of mosquito netting, otherwise I would have been eaten alive. And one thing I just suggest you might try, if you want to try an experiment in listening, and that would be, as you're listening, to see, well, you start to hear, you probably already heard, these are all recorded in stereo. So listen for the placement, there's the dimensionality of sounds. The fact that there's, maybe a frog over here and an insect over there. And also, do the sounds have textures? Or is there a shape to these sounds, which may be more of a creative imagination? But as you listen, try to see not only the physical placement, but the imaginary shape of these sounds. So let's listen to a little bit of the Pantanal. There are dawn choruses, famously, of birds, choruses of birds, and this is one of the go-to sounds for sound recordists. And what you're about to hear is one of my favorite dawn choruses. It was made in Australia. And this is one of the sounds I was telling you guys about. It's one of my favorites. Now, you won't hear them, but when this recording was made, well, it was made at the Grampians, which is a national park run by indigenous peoples of Australia, who are coming finally at last into their own in some instances, and this is their park. And at the Grampians, and I was there quite early in the morning, and I was surrounded by birds, mostly of which I couldn't see because there was a thick canopy in the forest, but I was surrounded by kangaroos. If you can imagine being surrounded by, just put that in your mind of being in a place and you're surrounded, literally surrounded by kangaroos. Probably saying to themselves, well, there goes the neighborhood. But they didn't make any sounds. But just being surrounded by kangaroos gave it a certain je ne sais quoi. Anyway, you won't hear the kangaroos, but you'll hear everything else. There's a bit of a dawn chorus. Now, when you listen to this, another experiment to try. And this you could try with a lot of sounds. I hope you know, the first one were the pictures and the separation. This one comes from this comes from the work of a man named Alfred Tomatis, who has a listening center, and the men who studied listening in a really interesting way. And that is to imagine yourself as sitting on a mountain of sound. You are, in fact, the mountain, and the base is like way down here in the gut. And bass notes that you're listening to, and the middle notes, and then the high end is like your head and even above. And so you have to even have a more erect posture to listen to those, reach and listen, imagining listening to those high notes. And in fact, our posture does influence the way we listen. So as you listen to, whether it's this or music, you could try that as an experiment to see if that informs or changes your listening. Certainly Tomatis thought it did. He was particularly fond of Mozart, saying it had the sound, those high frequencies that were beneficent, according to his line of research. So you might think of that here, or keep that in mind as an exercise of listening. But let's try the Grampians. I could listen to that for a long time, but we have more sounds to go, so unfortunately. Staying with birds for a minute. Each bird that we hear, there is often a layer of complexity that we don't hear, unless we slow the sounds of the bird down. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard slowed down bird song, but it's quite something. And you're about to hear birds from the thrush family, wood thrush, veery, hermit thrush, as I recall. I think it's in that wood thrush, hermit thrush, veery, if I'm not mistaken. You'll hear them first at normal speed, and then biologists, you'll hear them at slow speed, and hopefully it's something you'll remember. Pretty amazing, wouldn't you say? Extraordinary. Anyway, birds, some birds also famously mimic or talk. And this is an example of that, just staying with birds for a minute. These are you sort of getting some favorite sounds. This recording was done serendipitously. I was in Brazil again, walking around with this giant Nakamichi 550. Looked like this. It was like the size of a typewriter. And I came across a group of young women. I don't know what they were. They were, I believe, tour guides or training to be tour guides. And at this place where we were, the photographer and I, Jay Maisel, and I were traveling in Brazil. Actually, do you know that box somewhere? It has those sound image 1 and 2 in it. You know the big box? Maybe it's behind there. Oh, is it? Oh, Thank you, Kim. See, Kim just knows. Anyway, this was what came out of my experience in Brazil. It ended up being this ancient artifact known as an LP, and it came with, and Jay Maisel was the photographer, and so it was a folio of photographs, that being one of them, of moments of that went with a recording. There's a record in here, there's notes. And this is the third in the series. We'll get to the Talking Parrot in a minute because it's from that album. But I also want to show you this. This was done while I was at UMass. I actually did this here in my year. This is sound image number 1. The first thing, I didn't do radio first, I did this. Minor White was the advisor for this, and some of Minor's pictures are in this. A folio of photography and sound. They're not available anymore, and they sell on eBay for outrageous sums of money. But the CDs, this was made, Bahia was made into a CD, and then I eventually made a book, Pulse of the Planet book, this is my gift to the library. Well, this is going to be for the library, which doesn't have this. According to Al Hudson, the library does not have a copy of this book. It wasn't listed. Maybe it's in the secret archives, sort of like in the Hogwarts version, it's hidden behind the mirror. Anyway, this book, and this is available on CD. And by golly, we have CDs available. Kim is going to have them for sale. This is my merchandising moment. $10 a pop, and it's a bargain. Can't get them anywhere. Getting back to the thread of the story, one of the sounds on Bahia and on the CD made from Bahia is this moment of a conversation between a young girl, one of that group, and a parrot. So you'll hear first the girl and then the parrot. Again, not manipulated. This is just the way it happened. Came across this. That's the girl. It's the parrot. I'm mad at you, she's saying in Portuguese to the parrot. It still makes me, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's objective art, but it still makes me laugh every time I've heard it hundreds of times. It cracks me up. So you've received this gift, this wonderful moment of sound that you want to now share. It's one of the human imperatives to share what we've received. And it's not, it's not just anything. It's something that touched you deeply, and you want to share it. You feel it's valuable. The same way that a painter receives a vision and wants to share his or her vision with the world at large. So how do you do it? What do? You could make a CD or a record like I did, or you could make a radio program and now a podcast. But it's the answer of, what would take somebody to grab by the lapels and say, listen to this. What's the context? Well, one way would be to find something that you feel is compelling, a subject, a moment that's compelling, that is worthy of being shared. And this is an example of that. Here's a Pulse of the Planet program, an early Pulse of the Planet, a Massachusetts story, I might add. You'll hear it now.
A group of pilot whales had beached themselves, and now as the tide was falling, word was getting out, and Cape Cod's ad hoc army of volunteers was coming to the rescue. I'm Jim Metzner, and this is the Pulse of the Planet.
Right now the tide is going out and these animals are going to be be high and dry for the foreseeable future. That is either until the next tide comes up to float them 12 hours from now, or until we can pick them up and move them. We're checking out the area right now, looking for pools that may remain after the tide goes out. We may be able to move them and keep them in those pools. That would be the best scenario.
Dave Wilder is with the International Wildlife Coalition, one of the many environmental groups that come together during a whale rescue.
Right now we're covering them with blankets and sheets, one to keep the sun off them and keep them moist, and also in some degree help them control their body temperature. They can quickly overheat in a situation like this, so we'll keep the water on to keep them cool, or in some cases, if they go into shock, they can start getting cold. In that case, we'll use other things and put more blankets on and try to keep them warm.
Why expend all this effort to save stranded whales? Why not let nature take its course?
But we don't know what nature's course is, and so it's very difficult to stand back and just say, well, this is nature's way. It's like when people in India, they say, well, it's somebody's karma to drown. Well, maybe it's your karma to save them. That's kind of a roundabout answer. But right now, we're doing so many negative things to the planet that it's nice to have one thing that you can do that has maybe a positive influence, and this certainly does.
It's true. After a while, I put down my microphones and lent a hand in the rescue operation. Looking into the eye of a whale close up and hearing it breathe and vocalize was the only payment that any of us volunteers expected. That and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I helped save the life of a fellow creature. This archival program is part of our 30th anniversary celebration. If you want to hear more, check out our podcast.
Another way, another approach is for the sounds to reveal something, or the sounds in the story that they're part of, to reveal something new about a sound. Now, it could be something that's very familiar to us, and yet we're going to be hearing it now in an unexpected way, or it's going to reveal something about something that we thought we were familiar with, and now we're kind of hearing it in a new way. Now, this came from the predecessor to Pulse of the Planet, You're Hearing America, and sponsored by Maxell Tape, as you will hear. But it was, in fact, the tape that I was using at the time. So it was an organic sponsorship. Anyway, You're Hearing America.
And you got to make the player believe in the strike. So however how you go about that, that's your own personal style.
What separates one major league umpire from another? It's a personal style based primarily on sound. We talked with 3 American League umps in Seattle recently, and they demonstrated and talked about why they sound the way they do. I'm Jim Metzner, and You're Hearing America, recorded on Maxell Tape.
Well, I've never said strike in my career. I just never could get out. I just couldn't get it out. Yeah, that's a strike. But you really got to feel it. Yeah, that's it.
Mine is one I just go like that, and the strike 3 is just I'll reach in and pull back, and it's like that. Looks like a karate move, but it works. And then a lot of times, the louder you are, you drown out a lot of the criticism too. So by the time I'm done with my opera, they're not yelling too much.
And my particular deal is just, yeah, 3 would be strike 3.
Three. And we call them from our heart. Basically we don't care who wins the ball game. So the idea is to go out there and try and get in as little trouble as possible. And if you're aggressive out there and you sell yourself, a lot of times you'll stay out of arguments by being aggressive.
My thanks to American League umpires Larry Barnett, Durwood Merrill, and Rocky Rowe. I'm Jim Metzner, and You're Hearing America, recorded on Maxell Tape. Maxell, it's worth it.
There he is again. Now, sounds, when you go out and you start to get serious about sound recording, you get the feeling of that they're like beckoning you. I think we were talking about that, and the folks we have some friends from WMUA here. We were talking about taking sound walks, and when you're making a recording, you're kind of like having your own sound walk that hopefully you'll end up sharing with somebody else. And this was a case of that. I was in Fez one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, I believe, in Morocco. And I really did have the feeling that these sounds were like pulling me along. So now sit back and relax, close your eyes or whatever. You want to lower the lights if we can or not, but we're going to take a journey to Fez. This was on a public radio program that I did. I think it was called The Savvy Traveler, an offshoot from Marketplace, which is still on the air. The Savvy Traveler is not. This is Fez.
A tape recorder is a pocket full of breadcrumbs. When you record sounds, wherever you go, you leave an invisible trail from moment to moment. And then one day, you listen to the tape, and you find your way back again. This trail leads to Morocco, the city of Fez, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Let's follow these sounds and see where they take us.
Hi, my friend. Come on.
Fez is really three cities. The first, a modern European-style metropolis. The second, Fez el Jadid, or New Fez, dates from the 13th century. And Old Fez, Fez el Bali, goes back to the 9th century. And that's where we are now. Picture an ancient walled city, and inside the walls is a maze of alleyways, too narrow for a car to get through. So the traffic inside Old Fez is mostly people and donkeys. Balak is the donkey driver's equivalent of a car horn, and it means out of the way. 225,000 people inhabit the old city of Fez in an area roughly 4.5 square miles. For the folks who live here, it's one enormous extended family. For a child growing up here, the alleyways of the old city are one extended playground. Amidst the bustle of activity of the city, always in motion like a giant human hive, there are moments when the sounds themselves will slow you right down. In a tunnel passageway with children playing nearby and tourists and tradespeople walking past, an old man intones praises to Allah. Morocco is an Islamic country, and in Fez's Medina, that's another name for the old city, there are literally hundreds of mosques. 5 times a day you can hear the call to prayer throughout the city, but probably the best place to hear it is from a rooftop, where it's just you and the pigeons. Non-Muslims are not allowed inside mosques, but it is possible to gain entrance to a Quranic school. Men who live and work in this part of the Medina come here to pray, but before they do, they remove their shoes and wash their feet, hands, and face at the fountain in the school's courtyard. As a flock of birds circles overhead, the imam begins his prayer facing towards Mecca, and a row of a dozen men standing shoulder to shoulder join him. Outside the courtyard of the Quranic school, the life of the Medina hums right along, and it's easy to be drawn through the alleyways and tunnels from one sound to another. That's the girab, who carries a goatskin full of water and dispenses it in a brass cup to anyone who requires a drink. Along with the bell, his signature sound, the girab wears a broad-rimmed hat fringed with tassels and a costume bedecked with tiny mirrors. And for a few dirham, the Moroccan currency, he'll let you take his picture. The passageways of the old city are lined with stores and stalls selling a mix of modern and more traditional goods. Foods of every description, but most especially dates and olives, spices, clothing, hardware, dry goods, school supplies, electrical supplies, video games, and cassettes. There are boom boxes everywhere here, and they compete for a niche in the raucous soundscape. In the ecology of the marketplace, tourists are both predator and prey, taking photographs at every opportunity of a people who, for the most part, really don't want to have their picture taken. In turn, the busloads of touristas who make their rounds through the Medina are hit on by hawkers, stall keepers, and would-be guides. The sounds of bargaining ripple through the Medina, and the merchants of Fez are master salesmen.
This is old pieces. Bronze, old bronze. 50 dirhams. It's not the deal that is important. It is your friendship for next time, perhaps. So money is not all. 600 dirham, you won't regret, and it's a nice piece.
There are subtler sonic delights in the old city, somewhat off the beaten pathways, like the sound of grain being sifted before it's ground into flour. Or the noise made by a little hand motor used to twist the cotton thread for making jalabas, the traditional men's outer garment. Fez has a rich tradition of craftsmanship. Whole sections of the old city belong to artisans who work in brass, stone, textiles, wood, and leather. In the Place Safarin, the stone chiselers work nearby the men who hammer the designs on brass trays. And sometimes it seems as though the rhythm of one is picked up by another. And then suddenly it's dusk, and the trail of sound morsels expands and intersperses throughout the old city. There's magic in the air, And what better place to hear it than at the Babu Jalou, the Blue Gate, the place where most people enter and leave the Medina. In the throngs of humanity that parade by, and in those at the cafes that sit and watch them, there's an air of expectancy, echoed by the birds who roost here, as if in the midst of all this apparent chaos, there's a last-minute chance to make some sense of it all. And for a fleeting moment, the music that is hidden in all sounds reappears. From Fez in Morocco, I'm Jim Metzner for The Savvy Traveler.
So each of us, in a certain way, carries our own mini archive of sounds. We were talking about archives earlier. But what about the idea that each of us is a kind of a organic sound archivist? We're full of our own memories of sounds that have left deep impressions in us, and the associations that we have of those sounds. I spent the better part of a year interviewing people with this question. Is there a sound that you heard when you were growing up that sort of came in and never left? Or it doesn't have to be when you were growing up, even later in life. A sound that left really, a bell that never stopped ringing inside. And it turned out to be a great question to ask, and I commend you for those of you who are, whether you're documentarians or not, if you ever want to have an interesting conversation with people, ask them about the sounds that have left memories. So the challenge of this program, which you're going to hear a brief excerpt from, and it'll be the last piece that we'll hear, and have time for questions, I hope, is it ran on All Things Considered, and got a lot of response. But the challenge was to basically find the sounds that people were talking about, or else recreate them. So this is this piece, I think, won a couple of awards. I forget which one, the Grand Award at the International Radio Festival. And you're going to hear an excerpt of Sound Memories. And my wife, I want to thank my wife, by the way, for working with sound.
Sunday morning, I would be up in my bedroom early, and down in the kitchen, my mother would be making tomato sauce. And after the oil would heat up with the garlic, she would pour the tomatoes in. And as soon as the tomatoes hit, there would be a sizzle. And I would hear that sound, and the entire house would explode with this wonderful aroma and this scent. And it never left me. And I could almost taste it as I hear it.
father in the kitchen singing, toot, 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 say goodbye. And he would just stroll up and down the hall in the house when I was growing up with his hands in his pockets. I could hear the change jingling in his pockets because he works in Manhattan. Needs all the coins. In those days, you need coins for subway tokens. And he would be saying, toot, 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 say goodbye.
Toot, 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 say goodbye.
My mother was Scottish, and every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. she'd put the pipes and drums on full volume, and I woke up to that every Sunday morning of my life. And that made a very deep impression on me.
It was sounds that got you out of the house. Maybe they drove you out. Maybe they drew you. Now, listening back, they're inviting you again. The fire alarm, the ice cream truck, the card that your friend attached with a clothespin to the fender of his bicycle made it sound like a motorcycle. Or the first time you ever went somewhere just to listen to the sounds there. It was underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. Sounds do have a life of their own. They can take you to undiscovered places. But more often than not, they'll take you back to the brink of a memory, to a moment that was catalyzed by sound.
When I was really young, I had a favorite uncle who lived with us for a while, who used to tell me stories. And we had this habit, he would stretch out on the floor and with a big bowl of apples next to him and tell me stories while I rested my head on his stomach. All of these stories were accentuated by the sort of the apple and sort of the sound of his breathing. And whenever I hear the sound of an apple being bitten into, that's a little bit of the
Once upon a time,
pleasantness that was connected with those experiences.
there was a princess who lived in a big castle. Want a bite? And far, far away in the forest, there lived a very mean ogre. You know how many heads he had?
How many?
5. 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah. And this ogre used to eat little children that would come by and then look at daddy. Or without their mommy and their daddy. Read them up just like this.
Just several years ago, on the west coast of British Columbia, I found an abandoned seal pup and spent the night with it sleeping on my stomach. And its cries awakened something incredibly maternal within me, something which I wasn't aware of. And I still hear those haunting cries that really settled into the core of my being.
Growing up in Algiers during the war, 1959 to 62, we lived in Hydra, in the southern part of the city, and periodically there would be bombings, and those would happen mostly at night. And so one of the most powerful sound memories that I have was a low percussive thud of bombs going off around the city, and the way the vibrations would transfer into the walls of the house and the metal shutters by my bedroom window. Often concurrent with that, on these evenings, with warm breezes coming up from the valley to the south of the city, would carry slightly modulated voices of Berber tribeswomen ululating, and that would sort of envelop the house and the sound that was at once beautiful but also terrifying on some levels.
Long ago, it was in around 58, 59. We were all outside in the garden. It was late, maybe midnight. And suddenly, looking to the star, we saw three objects, three lights in the sky, and it was coming
I
from
first heard the
left.
sound, I thought it was maybe a low-flying jet, and then I thought, well, maybe it's a couple of low-flying jets, and then it sounded really like a fleet of low-flying jets, and then, we ran outside to see this
light in the sky, and it was coming from left to right. But the most strange of all was the sound. It was like something in the wind, something between the wind and something metallic.
That I felt that if it were any louder at all, that everything, me and all life around me, would have been shattered.
Something I will never forget, never.
So I want to leave you before we come to questions with this one thought, that we live in a world of vibrations. Maybe we're attentive to them, maybe we're not. And also this other world of inner vibrations, sounds, and the whole panoply of associations that we have with them. So there's sort of these two choruses, the outer and the inner chorus, and we live our lives between them. Almost a little bit like, you could think of it like being in the swirl of the calm of a storm, being the eye of a storm. And what if there's something behind both of those choruses? What if there's another quality of sound that we can almost, if not hear, intuit? Almost like when you hear someone ask a question, you can sometimes intuit that there's a question behind the question, the unspoken question. Do you know what I mean? That sometimes you're not hearing the words, but you know that there's another question behind that. It might be a little bit like that. This inner between place is a little unknown, maybe even a little mysterious, and sometimes even a little scary because we don't quite know what it is. But what if we're quiet enough, we can try to incarnate that space and be open to another level of listening, or you could even say the magic of what deep listening could really be about, if that makes any sense. So I'll leave you with that, and happy to answer any questions or hear your own sound memories or whatever the thoughts you might have about places that we would go to intentionally to listen, or whatever you want to talk or ask about. But that's the talk, and thank you. Now, if there are any questions or comments, Kim is going to go amongst you and use the microphone because they're filming. Yeah, here's one right here, Kim.
In the last clip you played, you recreated the sounds that the people were describing.
Yes.
Yeah.
How did you do that with the ululating and the bonfire?
Well, I went to what I thought was the best source, which is the Battle of Algiers, and because he was talking about Algeria and that war, and I had already my own sounds of ululation, but I wanted to come as close to the source as I could, so that was where they came from.
Follow up, what was the sound that they described at the end, the last couple?
What do you think?
I have no idea.
Any other thoughts? What were they talking about? Anybody want to guess? From the very last sound, the sound of that. What?
Pouring rain.
No, the very last sound was pouring rain, but before that, the one that loud, when you had that sort of, that almost duet of people having a same or similar experience, they were talking about the sound that was so loud it thought that everything would shatter, like a fleet of low, yeah. You speaking to the mic.
Is it like a nuclear bomb test in like the desert in Mexico or US?
No, thankfully. No. They were, anybody else want to guess? It was UFOs. They had seen UFOs. This one was my brother, in fact, and one was a good friend of mine, and they had both at different parts of their lives seen unidentified flying objects that made this very loud sound. And so I recreated what I thought that sound was. That's what it was. Good question. I wanted to ask you, does anybody here have, if I had stuck the microphone, not necessarily that microphone, in front of you and asked you that question, what would you say the sound memories that you had that still stay with you? Deep sound. Yeah. Judy.
I have one which dates back to 1963 or 4, when Al and I lived in a small village in central Borneo, and there were 2 seasons. And one was a wet season, and then there was a dry season. And at that point, we heard nothing motorized at all, because the river was dried up, and the noises we would hear would be motorboats or something coming into the village. And one morning we woke up, and the loudest sound we heard was of this enormous bird, a hornbill, which was flying over and making its cry. And it was the loudest sound that I had heard maybe in 3 weeks, and I was really startled.
Yeah. Yeah. A totally different sound environment for what you're used to, and so a sound like that can make a really deep impact. I'll bet you can still even hear it in your mind's ear. Yeah. Anyone else have a sound memory they want to share? Anyone have a thought about a place that you go, we as a society, or you as a family, or you as a group, or some other people as a group, go to listen to something intentionally? Yeah. I'd love to hear what you think. Yes.
Like a music concert or like a band concert?
That would be, I was going to exempt that because, yes, of course, you're absolutely right. But I was trying to think of, yes, absolutely, music concerts. But besides that, yeah, you got one right here.
It's not really as a group, but personally as a kid, I always go out onto the balcony just to meet a busy street. We live on a really busy street in summer. Like, there's always cars. I'd either count the cars and then listen to them go by. That's why I go out to the balcony.
Totally. It's an urban sound that you grew up with. Me too, in Forest Hills, New York. I can still hear this, and every once in a while there would be a, on Yellowstone Boulevard, and you knew something had happened, but more often that was this hum. And yeah. Hang on. 1 second. Thank you.
I haven't done this, but my in-laws have. They go to hear the wolves howl. Wow. They have trips to go out and hear them howl.
Wonderful.
You may or may not hear them howl.
Where do they go?
I can't remember where they were, but that was actually an event where people would
Sure.
go.
Sure. Brilliant. Yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping for. Good one. You got one, Andrew?
Yeah, there's actually one that I know of that people go to in groups that I've been meaning to go to, and then there's one for me personally. The one that groups go to, there's actually a beach in Massachusetts. I can't remember which
Manchester, Singing Beach.
Yeah, the one where it's saying all the sand grains just sing, which is beautiful. But I haven't been there yet. I personally, in my backyard, it's a woodsy area, and there's this one stream that I discovered in middle school that I used to walk to, and it's just far away from like other civilization, so you just hear the stream and bugs and birds.
Yeah, great spot. And I remember, I think it was Siddhartha in the Herman Hesse book, that there was a famous part of that where someone learned how to listen to the river. That's what you're talking about, it reminds me of. Yeah, you got one?
I haven't been to this place, but there's a...
Pass the microphone. Hang on one sec.
Sorry.
Thank you.
There's a place, I believe, in Pennsylvania called Ringing Rocks, where people intentionally go to strike. There's this field of rocks, and they only resonate within this space. If you take one out, it will not resonate the same way, but you can hit it with like another rock, and it will resonate as though it's like a bell or something.
Really? There's an X-Files sound for you. So I believe, I think in the archive I might have that sound. I know I've got the Singing Beach, and I might have the fact that they don't sound anywhere else. That's new to me, but don't quote me on this, but I think I have the sound of the Ringing Rock. You know, when you record sounds for 40 years all over the country, you're going to get stuff like this, you know, people that say, hey, let's send it to the sound guy. I even have a guy who once sent me what he said was Bigfoot, and somewhere in the archive there's the sound of who knows what, but somebody thought it was Bigfoot. Any other sound memories or yeah? Here we go. Great.
I took my youngest child to here, just across from where we live, American woodcocks when they're doing their mating call.
Oh gosh.
That's a good one. They go flying up in the air going, woo, and then they make a peep noise when they're on the ground. So
Cool.
that was fun. And you do it at twilight, so that's fun if you're a little kid who's like 8.
Magical. Yeah, sure. Wonderful. Any others before we, or questions? The last chance? Okay. Yep. So, yes, please. Come in Chicago.
One of the things that I remember in terms of sound is when I was younger and my parents were going up the stairs, I used to lay on the floor and memorize the sounds of their steps so I know who was coming on. Yeah, I also know I have 2 dogs and I know when each of them are going down, my little one goes 2 steps at a time and his legs are short, so it's like a little bump, bump, bump. And my German Shepherd just hurdles the whole thing, so you only hear her go once and then you know it's her. I'd actually wanted to ask what the title of your concentration was in PDIC when you were here.
Ethnomusicology. And Al was my advisor. And I took classes. I took his class here, but I took acoustic ecology at Smith, which was an amazing course. I took, is it Hampshire? That's the other class. Studio at Hampshire. I took music composition at Amherst College and another ethnomusicology class, not as good as Al's, at Amherst College. And I took something at Mount Holyoke too, I think something with guitar or something like that. So all 5. And it gave me, thanks to the BDIC program, the background. It was exactly what I needed to have. I got a couple of chops in the studio. I learned about ethnomusicology, and most importantly, I fell in love with sound recording and found my...
You collected a lot of stuff right in Amherst.
Yes, I did.
Yep.
It's very true. One of the...
Madagascar?
Yeah, tell him what it was. Tell him about Freeze Madagascar. I'd rather have you tell it. This is true story.
Jim was always prepared before he came to UMass, particularly with photography, which has now slipped a little bit beyond his normal ken. But recording technology and stuff. Anyway, he was always getting sounds, live sounds in the Amherst area. And one was, it started with the motor freezer motor in an Amherst restaurant.
Beardsley's, actually, in Northampton, yeah.
And over that, he ran a Malagasy, a Madagascar dance band.
Well, Valiha music from Madagascar, yeah.
And he called the whole thing Freeze Madagascar. But my favorite one from these collections, there was a young woman over at Hampshire College who played the balloon.
That's it. He remembers the sound. That was it. Brilliant.
And this balloon had a name, Hilito. And her punchline was, it's all in the wrist. He had pulsars and all kinds, just lots of stuff, which precedes Sounds of Boston and all these other things.
Yeah.
Anyway, nice stuff. But he took courses and picked up stuff where he wanted it. And was into the technology of sound recording, as he had earlier been into the technology of photography. And I don't know all of the stuff you have now that you record with. But he was, I put in a punchline for BDIC. Couldn't have done it in any other major at that particular point.
True. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. It's been a pleasure. Somewhere there are talk to Kim if you want CDs. One of the CDs actually has a lot of the sounds Al's talking about. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you all for coming.